Video games, being an interactive medium, are oftentimes used to grant people the ability to do things they'd never get to do in real life, either because it's not possible or because doing so would be considered a felony. I think the former is generally more exciting. I love living out all my wildest fantasies, like being abnormally fast, or abnormally small, or going to a theme park. Well, wait, that's just something I can do in real life. And legally, actually. So then what's the point of making a game about that, then? Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure. It exists, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around that fact. How did they manage to fit 133 acres of land into this tiny little circle? Whatever black magic they did to pull that off, it must not have been worth it, because this game was hated by critics when it first dropped all the way back in 2001. So obviously I have to sink my teeth into it. I was also just there at the real Universal Studios not too long ago, so I feel particularly qualified to discuss this topic. Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure, like all games in the 6th generation, opens with a crappy, pre-rendered intro cinematic, and wow, this game looks pretty action-packed. Why didn't the critics like this again? After watching the DeLorean fly past a couple buildings and a man running into stock footage of fire, we're given the choice of one of 6 children. I picked this one because he looks the least soulless out of the given options. And with that, we enter the park, and Jesus Christ, what is that? This thing here is Woody Woodpecker, and he's the mascot of the park. Something that must not have stuck. Probably because he's an ancient cartoon character, and the one time they tried to present him to a modern audience, it failed miserably. I've never seen any piece of media with this character in it, and I'm kind of glad that's the case, because his voice is one of the worst sounds I've ever had to hear in my entire life.
Welcome to Universal Studios! I'm Woody Woodpecker! I'll be your guide.
God, it's like nails on a chalkboard. Or really anything on a chalkboard. Can we stop pretending like chalkboards aren't just painful on the ears in general? Anyways, Woody, whose name includes a whopping 3 slang terms for penis, is kinda like the flu, because he's fucking everywhere, dude. He's here, he's here, he's here, he's here! He's omnipresent all throughout the park, because today is Stamp Day, and he's gotta be ready to dish out stamps anywhere, anytime. That's because stamps are the goal of the game. Completing each attraction will net you a corresponding stamp. Gather all 8 stamps, and you're given the privilege of seeing the credits. But attractions aren't the only thing to do, because there's a whole overworld out there to explore. All the activities are scattered across the park, and you'll have to walk around it to find the objectives. The overworld is presented like an old Resident Evil game. A bunch of pre-rendered environments with collision laid on top of it so you can walk around as if it were a real 3D environment. Fortunately, it doesn't include tank controls. Unfortunately, they made up for it by making the whole park confusing to navigate. For one, it's often hard to tell where you can and can't go. Like, look at any other game with pre-rendered environments like this. It's clearly indicated which paths are places you can actually go. That's mostly because Resident Evil games of that era primarily took place in confined spaces, enclosed rooms and thin corridors that naturally lead the player along so they're never left wondering what's a path and what's not. Even in RE3, which has city streets as a primary setting, there's usually visual cues like junk blocking the streets to tell you, hey, that's not somewhere you can go, why don't you try going this way instead? Now, Universal Studios is a theme park, so it has to have big, wide, open spaces and multiple paths around said spaces, so that guests can comfortably traverse the park. Which is great in real life, but when you try to translate that into a series of fixed camera angles in a video game, it just doesn't work. You end up with areas that are too big and have too many things that look like pathways but are actually invisible walls. This looks like a place I should be able to go, so why can't I go there? And then you have the inverse problem. Places that you can go to that don't look like places I can go to. Like this place right here. Or this one at the bottom here. And neither of these issues are helped at all by the poor collision in the overworld. Several times in this game, I assumed I just straight up could not go somewhere because I tried going there and got stopped by an invisible wall. When in fact I could go there, I just had to approach it at a very specific angle. Such as this sidewalk here that I thought I couldn't access because every time I tried to walk onto it, I'd get stuck on an invisible barrier. Another issue is that there's often large gaps in between screens. It's almost like using Google Street View. See, you'll walk from one screen to the next, and it looks like you're in a completely different place with no connection to the last screen. That, in conjunction with the inconsistent camera angles, combine to make it a pain in the ass to get a mental image of the park's layout. They try to remedy this problem by including an in-game map, which, yeah, it helps a little bit, but all it really does is give you a general idea of where you are, because they don't tell you which direction you're looking. I found it mildly helpful, but just not helpful enough. This confusing map is populated with a wide assortment of creatures. Most prominently, other park guests. Sometimes 3D, sometimes not. They don't look good, that's for sure. My personal headcanon is that these are homunculi or something because they both look and act like complete husks. Every time you talk to one, they repeat one of like 7 phrases, and they're all bland stuff like, "Hello, thank you, this is exciting." What is exciting? You're standing in a line that hasn't moved forward since I got here. What are you so jazzed about right now? Some of the NPCs you'll find wandering about are park employees. These ones usually have something more important to say, or even have an item to give to the player. I think my personal favorite is this guy who stands in the middle of the street all day and holds a sign telling you if you have Rumble on or not. If you turn on Rumble, he starts violently shaking this GameCube controller like he's trying to jerk it off. Another thing you can find while exploring is trash. Yes, there's trash on the ground, and guess what? It's your job to pick it up, not the employees, you. I guess this explains why me, a child with no parental supervision, was allowed into a theme park without being stopped at a ticket booth. They're making me work off my ticket with unpaid labor. Well, okay, they do pay me, but not with cash, with points. But I'll get to that later. That's a whole other can of worms. Besides, I've been going on about the overworld for way too long. Let's talk about the attractions. There's 6 of them, each one being a mini-game based on an actual attraction at Universal Studios Japan. Universal Studios Japan. This is set in the Japan location, not Florida. My expertise means nothing here. I am powerless in this domain. Not that it would matter much, since most of these rides are defunct now. In that regard, the game is almost like a time capsule. A snapshot of what Universal Studios' ride lineup was like in 2001 when this came out. So which one should I visit first? How about Wild 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 West Stunt Show? That's 4 whole W's, holy shit. This is a shooting gallery, easy enough to understand. An adult man has challenged you to a firearm competition, and you must shoot more things than he does. I sucked at this. I can't tell if the reticle is too sensitive or if I just can't aim, but I spent way too much of my life losing repeatedly to this guy. By the time you can position yourself just right to aim at something, he's probably already shot it and moved on to the next thing. The main thing you're meant to be shooting at are these targets, but there's also cans all over the place that can net you bonus points. Bonus points that you're gonna need if you want even a chance at winning against the AI opponent. I eventually figured out that the reason I kept losing is because I was actually trying. See, if you just spam the shoot and reload buttons at the same time and bounce the reticle around, getting it in the general area of the targets, then this game is a catwalk. Or at least it was the first time I tried this strategy. All subsequent attempts were hit or miss. But I have the stamp, so who cares anymore? That's 1 stamp down and 7 more to go. So let's keep the ball rolling and check out another attraction. And since it's the next one I was able to find, how about Jaws? That's a good one. Let's just speak with the Dick Bird real quick and... You can't get in here because there are too many people. Is this a joke? There's a wait for the ride in a video game. Not even a wait, he just straight up won't let me in the ride at all because there's too many people. What the hell do you mean, too many people? There's 4 people in line. And I know for a fact this ride can carry much more than 4 people, so I think you're just stopping me from getting in because you're an asshole. What you're supposed to do is wear a dorky hat to get in. Each ride has a corresponding hat that you can buy with those points you get for picking up garbage. That's fine and all, but why do I have to walk all the way back to the front of the park when I want to buy something? Woody is present in front of every ride, just let me buy my stupid shark hat here. And also, if the shark hat is so important, why doesn't anybody else in the park have one? I smell a conspiracy. Maybe that's why the line doesn't ever move. He's not letting them in either because they don't have hats. Or the devs just didn't feel like programming an animation of people entering the attraction. You know, it's probably that. Well, since I can't afford a new hat yet, why don't we check out one of the attractions you don't need a hat to enter? Waterworld. Based on that Virtual Boy game no one likes, and that movie no one likes. It's a recreation of the IRL Waterworld stunt show, so you choose a seat, and... That's it? That little bump? That's not a stunt, that's me trying to find a door without my glasses. That was the most disappointing 7 seconds of my life. Disappointment that's only rivaled by the fact I was given pocket change as a reward. Why don't I try the other free objective, the one that actually gives you a stamp? Wander around the park enough and eventually you'll encounter Winnie the Woodpecker, who hosts a movie trivia minigame, which is required to be beaten at least once in order to get all of the stamps. So you have to answer 9 out of 12 questions correctly, and some of these questions are brutal. Unless you're like a hardcore movie watcher, the only way you're gonna win here is through trial and error. Like, what kid with a GameCube in 2001 is knowledgeable about Hitchcock movies and who directed Always? After failing a few times, I think the game had pity on me because it started giving me questions that were easy to an insulting degree, and questions about Back to the Future. All of which I got correct, obviously, because I have exquisite taste in film. After finishing the movie quiz just one time, you unlock 2 more minigames with Winnie. Sliding puzzles and concentration. Thrilling, I know. Hey, at least the concentration game works this time, unlike in my last video. Woody and Winnie aren't the only abominations you can meet in your journey. There's other characters who you can find in random areas. It's pretty terrifying encountering one of these in the wild, since half of them are old movie monsters, and they follow the player, then just stand next to you like they're expecting something. I know you want to shake my hand. I know you're gonna do whatever this is instead. I'm not giving you that satisfaction. If you make your way to the front of the park, you can talk to Woody Prime and trade your hard-earned points for various goods. It's not just hats that you can buy. There's also consumable passes that grant entry to any ride just once, raptor shoes that make you walk faster, and the hoverboard from Back to the Future 2, which grants you the best movement speed in the game. It's also 40,000 points, which is way more than any sane person would manage to gather while playing. I bought the Back to the Future hat since that ride sounded the most exciting to me. Back to the Future the ride is something I've always wanted to experience, but never have. And never will, because it was closed long before I ever got a chance to even go to Universal Studios. So maybe this minigame can give me a little taste of that experience. The minigame follows the same plot as the ride did. Biff has stolen a DeLorean, and we gotta catch him. Simple enough. Woody refers to him as a bully named Biff, which is a bit strange because I think the word bully is kind of an understatement. The game is a long chase segment. You follow Biff down a path with little to no obstacles and give him a little tap to lower his health, all while he shouts at you, and for some reason he sounds less like Biff Tannen and more like a slightly pitch-shifted Sonic the Hedgehog.
Are you okay? What are you doing? Hey, what's up?
The challenge here is to hit Biff a certain amount of times before the time limit runs out. You have to maneuver around just right to get close enough to him. There's drift buttons to help you turn faster, but they barely do anything, so it's mostly just down to turning normally at the right times. I was having trouble with it at first, but I started to get used to it over time. For a while I kept losing because I'd just barely be able to finish him off before the time ran out. The trick is to just stay on his ass the entire time. Don't ever veer away from him. It's a really basic minigame, and not a very exciting use of my time. Bit of a letdown. Next up, E.T. Adventure. I've actually been on this one before. It's still operating. In Florida, at least. I'm not sure which is more upsetting, the fact that Back to the Future was closed when I was too young to care, or the fact that it was outlived by a scrotum. In this minigame, you ride a bike from point A to point B, while dodging obstacles like cars parked in the street sideways and barricades that block nothing. There's also ramps, which don't seem to serve a logical purpose. Let's try and jump off of one. Oh, okay, I see how it is. When you get any distance at all between you and the ground, it's a gamble on whether or not you can stick the landing. No strategy seems to work, so no matter what, half the time you're just gonna... Aside from that, it's just kinda boring. The good thing is, the time limit is really generous, so you can just go around every ramp and still make it in time. And by in time, I mean over a minute left on the timer. I've never seen E.T., and neither this minigame nor the actual ride gave me any further desire to watch it. Next is Jaws. I'm starting to notice an overabundance of Steven Spielberg in this game. Jaws takes place on the boat from the movie, and has you picking up barrels and lobbing them at a shark. The shark will charge at the boat, and you gotta nail it with a barrel before it can do that. Otherwise, it'll destroy that section of the boat. It's inoffensive, but nothing special. The only challenging part is aiming the damn boxes properly. It's one of the few minigames I could get a perfect score in. See, a really good score gets you a red stamp instead of a blue one. How exciting. Too bad I don't care enough to go for all red stamps. If I ever really need to piss off a bull, then maybe I'll go back and do it, but that's a huge maybe. Aw man, Jurassic Park. I love this movie. This minigame is gonna be freaking epic. Unfortunately, it's not very epic at all. I'll give you 3 seconds to guess what this minigame is. Did you guess Pokemon Go clone? Because that's wrong. Why would you guess that? That's stupid. And it exists. No, what this minigame is an on-rail shooter that lasts 10 entire minutes. And I assure you, nothing fun or interesting happens during those 10 minutes. Like, I don't even know what to say. It's not even bad, it's just boring. The final ride in the park is Backdraft, based on the movie of the same name that I'd never heard of prior to downloading this game. This one's probably the most in-depth attraction, which is why I saved it for last. In Backdraft, you explore a building that's on fire, while putting out fires and saving civilians, who are all doing an impression of my hamster when I put him in a microwave. It has fixed camera angles, just like the overworld, and they're even more off-putting here than they were outside. This game does that thing where, if the camera angle changes, your control stick is still oriented in the same direction until you let go of it, which sounds good on paper, but here it just always feels like the controls are fighting against you. Your goal is to pick up every survivor while putting out the fires that block your path, and sometimes the fire fights back. In which case, you can often prevent it by just crouching. I say often because later in the level they introduce fire that shoots tiny fireballs at you. These are a huge pain in the ass, since to put out a fire you have to sit still for a second while you put it out, so it's kinda hard to move around and dodge the fire when you're standing still to put out a fire. It's especially fun in this one hallway where there's a conveyor belt that delivers you straight into a fire, and it's impossible to fully put it out in time before being slid directly into it. The final room is nuts, but not in a good way. It's not like cashews and almonds nuts, it's trash can full of peanut shells at Texas Roadhouse nuts. See, the whole room is filled with projectile fire and barrels that launch like rockets at the player. And if you stop moving so that you can hose down one of the fires blocking your path, then another fire is just gonna hit you while you're open, and you can't just quickly take down the fires so you can move, because there's no hit sound or rumble when your water stream is touching a fire. So you could very easily be aiming at nothing, and you wouldn't know because they don't tell you. So you just stand there shooting at a fire and nothing's happening, and you don't know because What kind of sick bastards does Universal have working on their attractions that are designing rides where prepubescent children are forced to pilot flying cars, shoot guns, flee from dinosaurs, and then die in a fucking fire? I now have 7 of the 8 stamps. There's just 1 left, but luckily this one doesn't involve anything life-threatening. Just picking up golden letters spread across the park. This is a pretty easy objective, for the most part anyways. Most of the letters stand out among the blurry background, and in the process of getting the other 7 stamps, you will have traversed the whole park, so you probably won't miss most of them. I keep saying the word most, I wonder why. Oh, yeah, that's right. There's 1 letter I just could not find. It was the letter I. See, I'd been to what I thought was every screen in the game, and I sure hadn't seen this particular letter I, so what gives? I figured out I had to find it in the daytime. This game has a day-night cycle. It starts in the daytime, and then after completing 5 attractions, it switches to nighttime. And some letters only show themselves after it turns to night. I found 2 old walkthroughs, and both said that the letter I was only available during the day, and that it was at the 2nd screen of the game, right near the entrance. So I went back there to look for it, and yeah, it wasn't there, which I attributed to the fact that it was nighttime. So I thought that if I just played enough minigames, it'd turn back to day. So I threw on a TV show on my second monitor and started playing E.T. over and over again, because that game takes 0 brain power. But after like 6 tries, nothing happened. So I thought, well, maybe it has to be 5 different attractions. And I started going in a circle, redoing every attraction at the park until it became daytime again. But eventually, I'd replayed every other minigame, and still, it was not daytime. So that's where I started to get a little annoyed. I looked a little deeper and watched another channel's review of the game, which I'll link that right here, and it was there that I learned that it never does turn back to daytime. I'm trapped in an eternal night. But that can't be the case, right? Otherwise, I'd never find the last letter, and I'd be soft-locked out of seeing the ending. Well, you wanna know what? You wanna know what was stopping me? You see this corner here, on this screen? It's where the player comes from in the beginning of the game, in a cutscene. But I tried going back there, and it clearly didn't work. There was no trigger for another screen. Well, it turns out there is, but only if you approach the area at a really specific angle, and then when you get back there, look, you see that tiny speck on the screen? That's not a grain of dirt, that's the last letter. That tiny, impossible-to-see thing on the screen that I didn't even think was real is the one thing that was keeping me from ending the game. So, what happens at the end? What's my reward for completing the game? You watch CGI renders of all the rides with fireworks behind them, and then Woody Dickcock launches you into space and puts you out of your misery. Bad game. Not good. I don't know what else to say at this point. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know I'm terrible at endings. Watch Lucky Star.